Hi, in this video, we'll be doing a demo on RBAC. We'll be creating a namespace, role, service account, cluster role binding, and then we'll try to switch the context to see it in action. So let's get started. So I already have some commands prepared and we'll execute them one by one. First is to create a namespace. So simply do a kubectl create namespace. So demo namespace is created. Now let's create a service account. kubectl create service account SAM in the namespace demo. So kubectl get service account hyphen and demo, and we can see that SAM has been created. Now is the cluster role. Now this is very important. There are four aspects and four objects that can be created, which is cluster role binding, role, and role binding. Now cluster role and cluster role binding can be used together. Cluster role can be used with role binding. Role cannot be used with cluster role binding. So let's create a cluster role. So the command is kubectl create cluster role, then the name, which is CR in this case. We can give any name you want for the cluster role. Then comes the verb. Now verb defines the action that can be performed on the resources. So verb is get, list, watch, delete in this case. And on what resources? The resources will be secrets, pods, and deployment. So this cluster role corresponds. This cluster role says that a user who is having this role would be able to get, list, watch, delete the secret spots and deployment resources inside the Kubernetes cluster. So let's create this cluster role. Now we have a namespace created, we have a service account created, we have a cluster role that says what actions can be performed on what resources. But in order to tie them together, in order to give a role, assign a role to the service account, we need something which is called role binding or cluster role binding. So in this case, let's create a role binding. So in order to create role binding, it's kubectl create role binding, and then the name, which is in this case super. Then we give the service account. So in service account, we give namespace colon and the service account name. So our namespace is demo and service account name is SAM. So we have given that. Then comes the namespace. This role bind, because role binding is a namespaced object. So we have to provide the namespace. Then is the cluster role. So this will be the cluster role that we just created, which is CR. So in this, we are binding this cluster role to this service account. So that's the type of binding that we are creating. So now we have created cluster role, service account, and also the role binding that connects both of them. So let's create few resources in the namespace. kubectl run demo -f image nginx and with the service account. So the pod is created, kubectl get pods -n demo. So we can see the pod is running. Now let's create a deployment as well. kubectl create deployment test image nginx namespace demo. So the deployment is also created. kubectl get deploy -n demo. So we have the deployment as well. So now that the pod and the deployment is created, we will take the token of the service account SAM and store it as token. And we'll set the credentials using this particular token. And also we'll set the context with this particular token. And for the cluster is Kubernetes. And what we'll do is we'll now use this particular demo context. So kubectl get pods. So it says forbidden, which is true because this particular service account, now whatever kubectl commands that we are running is as service account SAM. SAM service account do not have the role to view, delete, or do anything in any other namespaces. It can only view the pods from demo namespace. You can see we are able to see the pods in demo namespace, kubectl get deployed in demo namespace, that also we can view, but we should not be able to see the services. So let's do kubectl get svc -n demo, and it again says forbidden. So this particular service account can only do whatever the role that we just created and assigned to this particular service account. So which means we have successfully created the service account, the namespace service account cluster role, assigned it to the service account using the role binding, and we have created the credentials, the context, and now when we use the context, we can see this shows RBAC in action. So that's it for this lecture. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one.